came to our attention that an artist who worked on Marathon in the early stages of pre-production took a number of graphic elements from a graphic designer without permission or acknowledgement.
Watching Bungie the last 10 years has been a true masterclass in how to destroy a highly reputable company. Once they were the unshakable kings of console shooters, the visionaries behind Halo, a franchise that redefined not only FPS but console-based multiplayer.
Oh, get fucking beat down!
A developer fueled by passion, tight-knit teams with one simple goal: to make fun games.
We are the most cynical people. Like, we are the jaded crowd who, if a game doesn't entertain us in 5 minutes, we stop playing it.
But today, Bungie is no longer the bold innovator. They are the poster child for what happens when passion gives way to profit and mismanagement leads to trend chasing. In just 1 year, with Destiny 2, Bungie missed its revenue targets by nearly 50%, slashed nearly half of its workforce, and fired the very people who built its legacy. And then there's the game that was supposed to save it all, Marathon, drowning in backlash, delays, and a full-blown identity and morale crisis, with its tombstone already written. Add to that multiple plagiarism lawsuits, accusations of stolen assets, and a toxic workplace so severe, ex-developers have called for the leadership to be gutted completely. So what happened? How did Bungie go from revolutionizing console shooters to become a studio so mismanaged, so out of touch, that today the only real trace of its golden era is its logo? But perhaps the real story isn't just about corporate greed. Perhaps it's about who remained at the top and the decisions they made in silence for over a decade.
I don't think anybody in this world has ever done anything worthwhile without being their own worst critic. I think that, especially when you talk about any creative enterprise, if you somehow believe that what you're doing is the greatest thing ever all the time, it's absolutely not going to be the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, start independent gaming company. Is there an addendum that says remain independent? Because we should have put that in there.
Bungie Studios started properly in 1991.
We tried it out and it worked really good. We just kept going.
Every time you eat a piece of pizza, you have to cross something off.
In the early 1990s, a small group of developers from Chicago, led by Jason Jones and Alex Seropian, founded a studio not out of corporate ambition, but out of pure passion. A group of scrappy game devs who just wanted to make fun games, with a company culture that couldn't be further from bureaucratic or business formal. Their goal? Stay independent, stay weird, and just create cool stuff.
We didn't have any idea what we were really doing.
I think Tuncer needs to get the shaft.
Despite being newcomers to the industry, Bungie didn't follow the crowd. They made games for the Apple Macintosh, a platform that, at the time, was almost irrelevant in the gaming world.
Our Macintosh is here.
Their early titles were rough, yet ambitious, like Pathways into Darkness, but it was the Marathon trilogy, their breakout FPS series, that put Bungie on the map. To some, it was Doom for Mac, but that would be selling it short. While it didn't move millions, it became a cult hit, praised for its technical innovation and surprisingly developed lore and story told through terminals, while pioneering or popularizing features that would later become FPS staples, like mouse-based free look, dual-wielding weapons, and even an early voice chat functionality in its multiplayer. Marathon helped lay the groundwork for what Bungie would soon perfect, building not just games, but communities. However, they didn't settle into the FPS mold. Myth: The Fallen Lords in 1997 was a real-time tactics game, creating realistic, at least for the time, combat-driven physics and in full 3D. With yet another innovative title, Bungie quickly earned the industry's respect as more than just that Mac FPS studio. They were learning, sharpening their craft, and in the background, Bungie was getting closer to something bigger, something that would change gaming forever.
This game is going to ship early next year from Bungie, and this is the first time anybody has ever seen it. It's the first time they've debuted it. And so I'm very happy to welcome on the stage Jason Jones.
In 1999, one of the most unexpected figures in gaming history would unveil a game that would go on to redefine the entire genre: Steve Jobs. Thanks to Bungie's deep roots with Apple, Jobs was impressed enough to debut their next big project live at Macworld. And on that stage stood Jason Jones, presenting a spiritual successor to Marathon, a revolutionary sci-fi shooter, one with a sprawling world, vehicle combat, and graphics leagues ahead of its time. And playing underneath that demo, a hauntingly beautiful soundtrack composed by Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore, a piece that would become one of the most iconic soundtracks in gaming history, written specifically for this moment and mere hours before the event.
I remember Joe coming to me and all he said to me was, "That's it, ancient epic alien." So he just gave me those 3 words. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just try combining something that does that. Came up with the pounding drums, cellos, monks, alien voice, showed it to the guys on a Monday morning, and then they got on a plane to go to New York and show it at Macworld the next day.
An accidental masterpiece that hit exactly the right note. Hype was building fast, but behind that trailer, the game was still a mess and without clear direction. And the team still hadn't nailed down what genre the game even was.
We had a huge map for a continuous RPG game, and before that we had an RTS.
And then next thing you know, it was a third person and we were playing it in our office.
People probably want to know why we switched from third person to first person.
Jason again.
Yeah, it's all this damn Jason, man.
That's what happens when your lead is a crack addict.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, Halo depended on a lot of that early wandering.
Clearly, Bungie's biggest obstacle wasn't creativity or ambition. It was money and the brutal risk of staying independent. Despite the success of Myth 2, a catastrophic glitch forced Bungie to recall over 200,000 copies, costing them nearly $1 million and pushing the studio to the brink of bankruptcy. To survive, they sold shares to Take-Two Interactive, but it still wasn't enough. That's when Microsoft enters the picture, Plan B.
Bungie's kind of in financial trouble, and that they're talking to some people about potentially being acquired.
At the time, Microsoft was planning to enter the console war with the upcoming Xbox, and they needed a flagship title. Bungie's mysterious sci-fi shooter was perfect. By 2000, Microsoft had fully acquired Bungie, taking Halo with them, while Bungie's other properties like Myth were sold off to Take-Two. It was the end of Bungie's independence and the start of their legend. But behind the scenes, there were doubts.
Back in the 90s, Microsoft had an evil empire quality to them, and the idea that they were going to Microsoft was, oh no, they're selling out.
To fans and developers, Bungie had been the scrappy underdog, the indie darlings from Chicago who wore t-shirts and shorts to meetings. Now they were under Microsoft, a faceless tech giant and across the country. Had they sold out?
Greed, pure and simple. Cashed it in, sold our souls.
People just couldn't fathom being at Microsoft.
We liked being independent and, kind of the man sort of thing. And then now we go to the console, it's like, hey there, man. It's like shaking your hand instead of raising your fist up.
Despite the acquisition, Bungie remained fiercely protective of its culture, maintaining their creative control and, above all, continuing to make games they wanted to play. And so they got to work. They had less than a year to turn a bunch of ideas into a full-fledged console launch title. And with a deadline of November 15, 2001, the day the Xbox would hit shelves, crunch mode began. Other projects like Oni, Bungie's most forgotten game, mixing anime and The Matrix, had its developers rush to Halo to finish its multiplayer in record time. Whole chunks of content were cut. It was chaotic, all-consuming sprint towards a vision that no one was certain it would even work. Until it did. Against all odds, with a brutal development schedule, Bungie delivered a masterpiece. Halo Combat Evolved sold over 4 million copies, becoming the killer app that drove Xbox into living rooms around the world. In a single release, Bungie hadn't just made a great game, they had made history.
Am I right, Marines?
Halo redefined what a console FPS could be. Its stripped-down but intuitive control scheme of 2 weapons, grenades, and melee made the genre finally feel right on a controller, but gameplay was just the beginning. With its sweeping score, cinematic storytelling, intelligent enemy AI, physics-driven vehicles, and open levels, Halo wasn't just a shooter, it was a sci-fi epic. And at the heart of it all was multiplayer. This was the pre-Xbox Live era. No online matchmaking, no quick lobbies, so fans created their own communities, dragging massive Xbox consoles into basements, dorms, and living rooms, linking them with Ethernet cables and battling it out in custom-built LAN parties. With Halo, Microsoft had struck gold, but Bungie was broken. Since it wasn't originally planned as a trilogy, some of the crew wanted to move on, especially Jason Jones, as he found the Halo games too linear with little to no replay value. And creatively, Bungie seemed eager to do anything but more Halo. Projects such as Phoenix, successor to Myth, and a Monster Hunter-like game. But a sequel to Halo was also in the pipeline, an opportunity to do much of what was cut out of Combat Evolved, and Microsoft was clearly more interested in this new cash cow. Got to remember, it was their IP, not Bungie's. However, tensions were rising fast. Despite Halo's massive success, Bungie felt shortchanged, financially and creatively, and if they were to make Halo 2, something had to change.
We got a little, envelope from Microsoft. But what I remember was a general disappointment in the, sort of sharing of profits. So we negotiated a deal. We negotiated probably the only product-related profit-sharing plan maybe that Microsoft has ever done. And that caused us to stay instead of leaving. We were going to leave and start our own studio.
You would think things could only go up from here. They had made their stand, but behind the trailers and hype, Bungie was already buckling under the pressure. The exciting premise of Halo 2 made Bungie triple the ambition, triple the scale, and triple the expectations. Joe Staten, one of Bungie's key creative leads, writers, and the voice of grunts, would later describe the project like this. We ordered ourselves a giant sandwich, took a bite, but didn't realize how big it was before we started in. And we did that across the board. Technically, artistically, and story-wise, but of course, we didn't figure that out until way too late. Bungie had walked straight into a wall of overambition, but it wasn't just the scope. Internally, things were breaking. In 2002, Bungie's co-founder and unofficial peacekeeper Alex Seropian left the company, burnt out, disillusioned, tired of the AAA grind, but also frustrated with what Bungie was becoming under Microsoft. Alex had been a buffer, a creative shield between the team and the suits, and without him, Bungie lost one of their last safeguards. Their manager, their glue.
That was tough, even harder than on Halo 1 when the sound hardware didn't work and Marty was whining every day, and every time one of the dev machines crashed, we had no idea whether it was the hardware or our own weak-ass code. Like, that was all hard, but watching people come through and interview for the studio manager job and have them be chomp after chomp after chomp.
Clearly needing a studio manager, a new face entered the picture. Classic car lover Pete Parsons. Originally brought in by Microsoft, he was to become the studio manager and executive producer, making sure things ran smoothly. He was a true Microsoft's man, the one focused on brand management, revenue charts, and the general business side of things. Bungie was now being asked to deliver Halo 2 in time for the launch of Xbox Live. That meant late 2002, just 1 year after Combat Evolved, an impossible deadline. Marty O'Donnell recalled a conversation with Parsons. He told me, "You've got to understand that Microsoft has already planned their fiscal year," of which Marty replied, "Fuck the fiscal year." This clash of visions was evident, and Microsoft even put the release to a vote, pushing to ship an unfinished game just to meet marketing timelines. Only one man pushed back. Ed Fries, VP of Game Publishing and the man who signed Bungie, threatened to resign if they didn't provide the team more time. And it worked. Sort of. He resigned anyway 6 months later, knowing their true priorities, which sadly meant Bungie lost another one of their protectors against the corporate goals of Microsoft. And in the end, it wasn't even enough.
In-game demo of Halo 2.
E3 2003 came, and with it, one of gaming's most infamous vertical slices. A jaw-dropping demo of Halo 2 running in real time.
And you climb up on the cruiser and kick the guy off. I lost it.
Master Chief jumped up the ghost, kicked the enemy down and got on it, it was over.
Except it wasn't real. That build of the game never existed beyond the demo. It was an illusion, something we now associate with modern AAA deception.
We came back with E3 with actually less than what we wanted to. We came back from E3 with a demo. We did not come back from E3 with a playable part of a level.
From there, the crunch went nuclear, one far worse than Combat Evolved. Developers brought their babies into work, worked 14-hour days, built Halo 2 under stress, panic, and chaos. By release, the game was a shadow of what it was meant to be. The original story, duct taped over. Dual campaigns between Master Chief and the Arbiter cut down. The finale, a cliffhanger because they literally ran out of time. Bungie had a clear problem and wasn't all on Microsoft. The studio's rapid growth, now over 60 developers, exposed a deeply mismanaged project with extremely poor communication and oversight, and the initial overambition was a clear example of that. As senior artist Robert McLeese later put it, Bungie never had good managers, they had creatives that were forced into managerial roles while still remaining in their creative roles, basically working two jobs. Just a bunch of different voices saying, "This is what we are doing," and a lot of people scratching their heads wondering, when was this decided? Because you see, against Marty and Joe Staten wishes, Jason Jones had left the Halo 2 team overnight in 2003, while still moonlighting as director, off to the Phoenix Project team that was recently cancelled to direct a new project, Gypsum. This left the Halo 2 team effectively leaderless, guided only by an improvised mix of creatives, scrambling to steer a massive ship with no clear captain, only to have that project fail as well post the disaster of the E3 Halo demo, when all of Bungie had to come together to get it finished. Not the best decisions, not the best timing, but despite it all, by 2004, they still delivered.
Always one of the most eagerly awaited video games finally goes on sale.
Preparing to rewrite retail history.
Video game is expected to have bigger first-day revenues than any movie has ever had an opening day at the box office.
Biggest retail launch in entertainment history.
Dozens of grown men and probably about 3 women have crawled out of their parents' basements tonight to be first in line by the new video game Halo 2.
When Halo 2 dropped, it exploded. Over 8 million copies were sold, the biggest Xbox game of its generation, and more importantly, it launched Xbox Live into the stratosphere, and with it, the innovative new features we rely on today like matchmaking and even proximity chat with the wonders of the early 2000s internet.
Poppin' part 75. Poppin' part 75.
Betrayal. Against all odds, Bungie was back on top. But beneath the celebration, Halo 3 would have to bear the weight of everything they had left behind.
It's about believing you're the best and that there's nothing that you can't overcome. It's about showing everybody else that you rule the world.
But before development even kicked off, Jason Jones was gone. Marcus Leto, creative director and the father of Master Chief, went it out. Both burned out from Halo 2's chaos. And behind the scenes, Bungie's relationship with Microsoft was reaching a tipping point.
Jason Jones quit and Marcus Leto quit, and that was going to be it. That was, without Jason and Marcus, we didn't think we'd be able to do anything. Pete Parsons also threatened to quit. He's like, if Microsoft doesn't make good on what they are telling us they're going to do for Halo 3, I'm quitting.
According to Marty, the deal that had brought Halo 2 to life hadn't been as fruitful as hoped. And now Bungie, the leadership, wanted out. Enough was enough. They wanted their freedom and finally move on from Halo, so now they made a move. A threat. They would resign and leave Halo to Microsoft alone. And Pete, he actually did it. He left in 2006, although he stayed at Microsoft as an executive. We'll come back to that. And somehow it worked. Negotiations followed and Bungie struck a deal. Finish Halo 3 and deliver 2 more titles. In return, full independence. With Pete gone and Jason on a hiatus, a ragtag crew of veterans held the line, determined to deliver a satisfying emotional conclusion to Master Chief's journey.
We want this to be the Return of the King. We want this to be the final chapter in an epic trilogy.
And so, with Halo 3 on the way, Microsoft went all in. Over $40 million were spent on marketing, TV spots, CGI trailers, live-action shorts, even Super Bowl commercials. Halo 3 wasn't just a game, it was a cultural event, the end of an epic story.
Hey, finish the fight.
Finish the fight! Finish the fight, man. We gotta finish the fight.
Finish the fight.
Master Chief, Cortana, Arbiter, the Halo trilogy ended the only way it could, with a desperate Warthog escape, explosions all around, and that unforgettable score swelling in the background. A moment of catharsis for fans and developers alike. But it wasn't really the end. Bungie still owed 2 more games. That's how ODST and Halo Reach came to life. They weren't part of the plan, they weren't even projects the team wanted to make. But to their credit, be it through crunching hell or games that weren't planned, Bungie still excelled. ODST brought a smaller, more intimate story to the Halo universe. Reach gave fans a heartbreaking prequel, a tragic final chapter for Bungie's time with the franchise. Both games were met with praise. To some, ODST and Reach were equal masterpieces, but not everyone agreed. The community was split. Ultimately, Halo had been Bungie's greatest blessing. It made them legends, it gave them fame, money, and recognition. But it also became their curse, a franchise so massive, so all-consuming. In August 2024, Marty O'Donnell tweeted during Bungie's brutal layoff season, "Getting Bungie out of Microsoft was good. Not getting Microsoft out of Bungie was bad." Because you see, while Bungie had regained independence, becoming Bungie Inc., some people at the very top were still from Microsoft. Pete Parsons, a man more concerned about fiscal years than a good product, had taken one for the team to claim this independence. So according to Marty, he was brought back to Bungie as head of marketing in 2009, and soon became COO. Harold Ryan, another Microsoft transplant, had already stepped in as studio manager during Halo 3. He was the man that signed their Declaration of Independence, and so he was now Bungie's CEO. But even he wasn't the loudest voice in the room. That, at the time, belonged to Jason Jones, the studio's reclusive co-founder and largest shareholder. And sitting beside them on the board, the founders of this new Bungie, Marty O'Donnell, Chris Barrett, Bungie's longtime art director, very likely, Eric Rabb, brought on to help shape the lore of their next world, and Chris Butcher, engineering lead. These were the voices now steering the ship, a mix between good old boys and corporate plans. But here lied the problem. Bungie wasn't the same scrappy team from the Halo days. It was now a massive, sprawling studio with hundreds of developers. And those old management problems? They weren't about to fix themselves, and behind the scenes, Pete Parsons was climbing fast, acquiring more and more influence. So when Jason Jones finally returned, optimistic for Bungie's future, the reality was not much was going to change.
Talking to a publisher a couple months ago, and they asked what I wanted, and I just want them to get out of our way and let us make a game. Trust that we're gonna do something great, give us the money to pay for it, and then get out of our way.
Now independent, and with the ambition to build something entirely new, Bungie began searching for a publishing partner. The new project had been in development since 2007, spearheaded by Jason Jones, who had grown disillusioned with AAA development after the many failed projects in favor of Halo 2 and its development hell. With him initially was Chris Barrett, Jamie Griesemer, and Joe Staten, all important names for the rest of the story. They spoke with Microsoft again, they spoke with Sony, but every conversation hit the same wall. Nobody wanted Bungie to own their next franchise. But not this time. Microsoft had already taken Halo. This time the IP and Bungie's creative freedom would remain theirs. Enter Activision Blizzard. In 2010, Bungie announced a 10-year publishing deal with Activision. The same Activision led by everyone's favorite CEO, Bobby Kotick. Kotick proudly proclaimed that they were investing $500 million into Bungie's new franchise. Not just on development, but marketing, infrastructure, back-end services, global reach. It was one of the biggest bets the industry had ever seen, and Bungie wasn't shy either. Then COO Pete Parsons claimed this new franchise would rival Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. Yes, they were shooting that high. The name was then finally confirmed: Destiny, a spiritual successor to Halo, but bigger, bolder, part MMO, part looter shooter, part RPG, and unlike anything else in gaming at the time. By 2013, Destiny was finally shown to the world.
I want to tell you a little bit about what Bungie's been doing for the last few years. After Halo, we ask ourselves the question, what next? What's worth doing? When you have a studio with this much talent, what do you point it at? How could we take a genre that we know and love so well, the first-person shooter, and turn it on its head again? And our answer is Destiny, Bungie's next great FPS. In Destiny, we've created a fantastic new universe for players to explore, full of mystery and adventure. We've built a persistent online world where players grow and customize their characters. And we focused from the beginning, not just on the great competitive experience that players demand from a shooter, but to make sure that playing Destiny cooperatively with your friends was gonna blow your mind.
And the hype was unstoppable. God, this is exciting. I want this so bad, and I know pretty much jack shit about it. In Bungie, in trust. I wonder if the internet will blow up because of this. And it made sense. Borderlands had just proved the looter shooter could work. Now Bungie, the team behind Halo, was promising to take it to the next level.
So all of this is playable space that we hope to one day get to send you to. It is all real geometry. You could go there. We could go there right now, but we have a schedule to keep. I'll just show you this.
Destiny was then shown at E3, behind closed-door previews and cinematic trailers with enough quality to rival a well-polished film. The gameplay, the world, the music, it looked like the next evolution of shooters. The legacy of Halo was alive and well, or so it seemed. If you paid close attention or played Destiny at launch, you would notice something strange. Those early demos, they barely resembled the final game. I can't believe this demo had more story in it than the actual game did. Looking at this old test gameplay, it makes me think that this looks better than what we have now. This looks 10 times better than the Destiny that we got. So what happened? Well, to no surprise, Bungie was in classic development hell. But what's more disturbing this time was what happened to anyone who pushed back, who challenged the leadership. Jamie Griesemer was the first one to go, a Bungie veteran, lead designer, and one of the minds behind Halo's iconic 30 seconds of fun formula.
If you can get 30 seconds of fun, you can pretty much stretch that out to be an entire game. And so you can have all the great graphics and all the different characters and lots of different weapons with amazing effects, but if you don't nail that 30 seconds, you're not going to have a great game.
According to Blood, Sweat and Pixels by Jason Schreier, Griesemer grew unhappy with Destiny's creative approach. As to him, it felt too much like Halo. He wanted to be as far away from it as possible, pitching a fantasy shared world project called Dragon Tavern. Jason Jones, however, also wanted to move away from Halo, but for different reasons. He still wanted an FPS, but to be non-linear, open, and heavily replayable, effectively a live service game. They worked closely together on their vision, merging their ideas, but Jason's voice, despite not being CEO, was louder. He was the largest shareholder, and his version of the project was effectively picked. Over time, with each iteration and hundreds of developers coming in from Halo projects, like Reach and ODST, it just naturally gravitated towards being more Halo, with the shared worlds and RPG elements. Griesemer, frustrated, then flooded the leadership with emails warning about the game's identity crisis, unsustainable endgame grind, and how they could reconcile precise shooting mechanics with RPG-based progression. All valid concerns, but this internal fighting eventually reached a tipping point, and shockingly, Bungie's board then asked him to resign. Jamie went on to reply to a promotional trailer for the game on April 16, 2014, saying, "Destiny, from the creators of Halo, that we didn't fire." Clearly, the list of forced resignations didn't stop growing. Veterans like Marcus Leto, father of Master Chief, that almost quit after Halo 2, Paul Bertone, and even Joe Staten. Yes, that Joe Staten, lead writer of all 3 Halo games, director of ODST. In short, Destiny's story was a mess. Information here is limited, but based on reports by Jason Schreier, the narrative was adrift. The trailers had promised something epic, vast and grand. But behind the scenes, the direction was anything but. Joe reportedly grew equally frustrated, as Jason Jones, as the project leader, would change his commitments on a near monthly basis, making Staten's work difficult. In 2013, with launch looming, Staten put together a full cinematic supercut, a complete story presentation of Destiny's plot, characters, and arcs, but when he showed it to the studio, Jason Jones and the remaining leadership rejected it. It was too linear, too Halo, and remember, Jason didn't want another linear Halo experience. Destiny was being sold as a shared world shooter, an MMO light. I mean, just look at these 7 design pillars. But internally, it was such a mess, many developers thought they were making Halo 4, and others effectively World of Warcraft. A bunch of great ideas that are all siloed off, and none of them actually complementing each other. But instead of unifying the team to commit to a clear direction, Jason had other plans. Scrap it, all of it, just months before launch. Joe Staten and Marty O'Donnell pushed back, hard. Joe warned, if we try to recreate the game in 6 months, it's going to make a lot of people miserable. Marty was blunter. This is going to cause a death march, and it's not going to cause quality to happen. But Jones didn't listen. Ultimately, the story became a mess, a Frankenstein's monster cobbled together, and Joe Staten, tired of this leadership, left Bungie soon after. And Marty, he didn't back down either, especially when it came to Destiny's E3 2013 trailer. Marty's team had composed an original soundtrack for the reveal, but Activision replaced it with a licensed song. O'Donnell was furious, taking it to Twitter. The trailer was made by Activision Marketing, not Bungie. To be clear, the official Destiny E3 gameplay trailer, 2 minutes and 47 seconds, was not made by Bungie. It was made by the company that brought you COD. Probably not the most politically smart decision, arguing creative differences over Twitter, but to Marty, he wasn't just defending a song, he was defending Bungie's soul. The best designers were being fired, the creatives were leaving, and the story was a mess, especially when O'Donnell was also in charge of voice acting, leading to classic lines from Peter Dinklage, Ghost, our new AI companion.
That wizard came from the moon.
And now, on top of all of this, Activision was taking creative control. To Bungie's board and to Activision themselves, however, he had become a problem and increasingly erratic around the team, just like Reisemer, hard to work with. By April 2014, Marty O'Donnell was fired. The man behind some of the most iconic music in gaming history was now out. He would later sue and win a lawsuit against Bungie for withholding his shares of the stock in the company, and where some of this information comes from.
I saw the writing on the wall more than a year before I was fired, and it got increasingly frustrating to stay inside and work in the system of Bungie with the way decisions were being made by leadership. So I was, to a certain extent, kind of looking forward to not being there anymore because I couldn't make them do what I thought was right. So I had 1 vote out of whatever it was. I think there were 7 of us on the board. 7.
September 9, 2014, Destiny finally launched. A release day that marked both triumph and tragedy. On paper, it was a smash hit, the most successful new IP launch in video game history. The Bungie name had paid off, $500 million in revenue in 1 single day. But when players finally got their hands on it, the core gunplay and gameplay was excellent, but everything else was a mirror of everything that went wrong with development, contradicting all of their promises. The epic story summed up in 1 line.
I don't even have time to explain why I don't have time to explain.
Lore entries locked behind a website.
There is kind of a story, there's deeper explanation of what's going on in certain things in the game in the form of these little grimoires that you find. But don't get too excited, you can't read them in-game, you have to go to bungie.net, create an account, link your account, and then you can read them on there. Just have them in-game, why can't I read them in the game?
To repetitive and unrewarding gameplay.
Because the entire game is a repetitive grind. Every single mission is exactly the same thing. Walk here, defend Call of Duty Ghost. Walk here, defend Evil Cirque.
To missing content and endgame progression that was all grind and no soul.
And all this talk about how getting to level 20 is just the beginning is
and all the good shit is past level 20 is bullshit. It's more farming and grinding.
Because of course, they sold you expansion passes, promising more content. But to their credit, Bungie listened. 1 year later, they released The Taken King, a massive expansion that reworked almost every major system in the game. Story, loot, progression, all improved. Player sentiment shifted, and Destiny exploded in popularity, hitting new records as fans dove back in, hitching for that looter-shooter grind. And through its turbulent launch and gradual redemption, Destiny was no longer just a game. It was a platform, one designed for ongoing updates, recurring DLC, and an in-game store called Eververse, microtransactions. At first, it was small, just emotes, then loot boxes, then armor sets. The frog was slowly boiling. Now you may ask, why? Greed? Well, yes, but Activision wanted frequent content releases. It was part of the 10-year deal. Developers reported that Eververse was a solution that helped Bungie fund large expansions like Taken King without needing constant $20 DLC packs that launch between the major expansions, resulting in smoother development. A solution that came at a cost. Destiny had quietly become the blueprint for live service games, and other studios took notice. From The Division to Anthem to Marvel's Avengers, everyone wanted their own Destiny. It was the future, and it was working. But Destiny 1 development had caused not only Bungie to crack, but split the studio apart. Jimmy Griesemer, after his exit, went on to say, "There was something about Bungie's trajectory from small and scrappy to king of the world to over-the-hill dinosaurs. They accumulated the negative traits of all of those stages. So there was the immaturity of being young and scrappy, the arrogance of being on top of everything, and then there was the stubbornness and an ability to change from the dinosaur stage." Bungie's leadership, Bungie's board, seemed to be prioritizing ego over vision, control over communication. It was this culture, not Activision, although they were not innocent, that caused Destiny's fractured state and pushed many of its best minds out the door. By 2016, that culture began to calcify. CEO Harold Ryan was out. Pete Parsons took full control. Now CEO and chairman of the board. Jason Jones was named Chief Creative Officer, and the remaining voices mostly stayed the same. And so, as Destiny 2 entered development, nothing was really fixed. The cycle would simply begin anew. But here's the most tragic part of it all. Bungie didn't just have leadership problems, they had become the very thing they once swore to avoid: a corporation. Quarterly earnings, carefully planned monetization pipelines, microtransactions baked in from day one. Destiny 2 would soon expose Bungie as one of the most greedy, shameless companies in the whole gaming industry.
But if you wanted something, anything, meaningfully different this time around, then Destiny 2 will leave you disappointed. And if you're a long-term fan of the game just hoping for more Destiny, then there's just as much chance that you'll enjoy the game as you won't. Because for every advancement in the campaign or open world design, there are gigantic steps backwards in core areas such as progression systems, the loot endgame activities, PvP, and microtransactions.
Destiny 2 was supposed to be the redemption, a fresh start. Instead, it became the blueprint for everything wrong with modern live service games. From day one, Destiny 2 fully embraced the model: seasons, annual passes, and Eververse, their microtransaction store, ready to go at launch. While the game was loved by millions with great core gameplay, hitting more than 1 million concurrent players in its first week, it was tragically infested not just by heavy monetization, but blatant player exploitation. Here's just a taste. Destiny 2 shipped with an XP throttling mechanic, purposely gated content, and a complete overhaul of the shader system. Destiny's core mechanic for recoloring armor, previously unlimited, now shaders were one-time consumables and of course, available in the store. Luke Smith, Destiny 2's director, defended this decision in a now-deleted series of tweets. Shaders are now an ongoing reward for playing. Customization will inspire gameplay.
What?
In the case of XP throttling, less XP meant fewer bright engrams, Destiny's loot boxes containing many customization items. Less loot meant more frustration, more grind, more pressure to pay. The grindier the game, the more inconvenient the systems, the more you played, the more you tend to pay. Classic engagement to revenue funnel tactics. Players were furious, feeling betrayed. Diminishing returns on XP for items that can only be earned from set XP or by coughing up real money in the micro store? That's pretty fucking low, like EA low. But while it may be easy to blame Activision, it was Bungie's decision, a decision that started in Destiny that simply grew more predatory. Eventually, Bungie acknowledged the backlash and removed the XP throttling mechanic or diminishing returns. But the damage was done, trust was broken, and over the next several years, that toxic back and forth between Bungie and its community only got worse. By the Forsaken expansion in 2018, Bungie made some gestures towards transparency. For many, it was a high point of Destiny 2. However, Activision was disappointed with its sales, despite the high quality. It was signaling player fatigue while failing to capture new players to an ever-increasing hardcore and bloated environment. By 2019, Activision was ready to pull the plug, and so the big news hit. Bungie breaks from Activision to publish Destiny on its own. Fans cheered. Holy shit, I hope this is a step in the right direction. Dear Lord, did Christmas come again. Bungie is free, except none of it got better. It got worse. Much worse. FOMO mechanics, fear of missing out, were fully baked into Destiny 2's DNA. Time-limited cosmetics, time-limited content, and with this came thread after thread of players feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, and manipulated. Then came the content vault, Bungie's decision to outright remove major chunks of the game in 2020 temporarily. Destinations gone, entire campaigns deleted. The official reason? Too bloated, too large to maintain. A fair point for a game not planning a sequel, but the ethics of it were still very shady. Literally removing content that you already paid for. It wasn't right, regardless of the reasons. Plus, indirectly, it was exactly the same tactics as the Eververse store, pushing players to new, paid content. There was no excuse for any of this. There was no evil publisher forcing Bungie. They had hundreds to thousands of developers, yet nothing changed. To everyone's surprise, Activision itself had dropped a bombshell. Post their split in a public earnings call, they admitted Destiny 2 was not meeting our financial expectations. Activision knew better. They knew the mess that was Bungie, and they escaped a sinking ship. But Bungie kept sailing, and to their credit, in time, things seemed to improve. In 2019, Destiny went free-to-play and was added to Steam, hoping to hook new players into their increasingly monetized ecosystem. And it worked. The COVID boom between 2020 and 2022 brought in a wave of new players and revenue. Bungie started to then dream big, really big. It all came clear in an interview and a press release. Bungie effectively wanted to become the next Riot Games, another live service titan. They were preparing new projects and teams. Incubations, Pete Parsons called them. They weren't just running Destiny anymore. They were preparing an empire, but behind that same growing empire, a ticking time bomb. In 2021, allegations began surfacing about Bungie's internal work culture: toxicity, discrimination, crunch, harassment. Pete Parsons issued a public letter promising diversity, inclusion, and reform, but as time went on, it became clear the leadership and management was worse than anyone had thought. In 2022, a new announcement: Bungie was acquired by Sony for $3.7 billion. Sony, eager to break into the live service genre, needed infrastructure, tools, and teams. With Destiny, other planned games, and a decade of back-end infrastructure, was the perfect buy. But why would Bungie accept it? After all, this was Bungie, the studio that had screamed for independence at every turn. The studio that literally fought tooth and nail to escape Microsoft. So why the pivot? Well, because the deal wasn't about growth. It was about survival. In 2023, Destiny hit yet another low with Lightfall, an expansion so poorly received, Bungie publicly apologized. "We know we have lost a lot of your trust. Destiny needs to surprise and delight. we haven't done this enough, and that's going to change. Player hours were down, revenue was 45% below projections, and the writing was on the wall. Layoffs hit, 8% of the company, over 100 people. Bonuses cut, benefits removed, even legendary composer Michael Salvatore, Marty O'Donnell's longtime creative partner, was let go. And then came the real scandal. Reports surfaced that, allegedly, Bungie had overstated its financial health before the Sony acquisition, where former workers claimed had they not been acquired, insolvency was looming. The next quote comes from a GameFile reporting. "I think Sony overpaid for Bungie," one of the former insiders said. "I think Bungie sold things they were just not able to deliver." At the same time, it was reported that Pete Parsons, the CEO, had allegedly spent over $2 million on classic cars. Which is fine, his money. But maybe not the best look when your company's collapsing and your employees are getting laid off at every turn. Bungie did have a solution to plummeting revenue though: restock the microtransaction store with one of the best cosmetics players had ever seen. Former developers would even go on to state that the leadership demanded more ways for the game to be monetized, deliberately designing less appealing armor to avoid competition in the Eververse store, prioritizing finances over creative input. It got so bad there was monetization scolding meetings for not enabling enough microtransactions. If that doesn't scream corporate rot, what does? Actually, I do have something better, the quote that summed it all up. In late 2023, with morale in freefall and layoffs still rolling, one employee shared that, quote, "It feels like many higher-ups aren't listening to the data and are like, we just need to win our fans back. They still like us. They still like us." Layoffs continued into 2024, even after the better-received Final Ship expansion, which included many reversal decisions like the sunsetting. Former General Counsel Don McCowan stated that it was good that Sony was inflicting some discipline and forcing them, Bungie, to fix things that were wrong with the game, blasting the leadership and, more curiously, their egos. But it was too late. Veterans and directors like Luke Smith were laid off, 220 people gone, and hundreds more, nearly 12%, were reassigned to other Sony studios. Some found out they were fired through Twitter, others lost their maternity leave before the weekend. How convenient. At this point, it felt like Pete Parsons and the board had played everyone. Their players, their employees, even Sony, and they weren't happy, demanding more accountability. Parsons then issued a statement. He called it painful. He blamed rising dev costs, industry shifts, the economy. But the truth, Bungie had scaled too fast. Over 1,000 employees at their peak, over projections, under deliveries, and players burning out. Fatigued by years of predatory monetization and broken trust, all in a game that proved incredibly difficult and convoluted for new players to join. It was a recipe for disaster. Leadership was clearly the main issue, a know-all approach, inflated egos, as if they wanted it all to fail. And worst of all were the incubator projects, hundreds of millions funneled into ambitious prototypes, black holes of money with no guaranteed return, and Sony banking on their success. Because one of them wasn't just a new IP, it was a name from Bungie's past, one fans once revered, now stripped of its meaning, repurposed for a future no one asked for: Marathon. Initially, Marathon pulled huge excitement. Tens of millions watched. From the creators of Halo and Destiny comes a new sci-fi PvP extraction shooter. Marathon said at the trailer description. Extraction shooter, okay. bold choice, but this is Marathon. This was the series that really started Bungie, the franchise that directly inspired Halo. From Master Chief to Cortana to the art style, all of it originated with Marathon. In some ways, this felt like Bungie going back to their roots. And then, April 12, 2025, gameplay reveal. This is the first time in my life I saw an actual game trailer look like a YouTube ad that I would skip while eating dinner. Concord 2 is coming along nicely, it seems.
Oh, shit.
From the visual clutter of its overly stylized art, directly contradicting everything Bungie used to stand for, simple yet effective design, to androgynous character models, to a PvP-based multiplayer-only experience, meaning no campaign. It became clear Marathon was the antithesis of everything old Bungie represented. By April 23, an alpha test, originally under NDA, only confirmed players' worst fears, quickly losing interest despite as more invites went out. The consensus? Aggressively mediocre. A cobbled-together mash of watered-down mechanics seen in other extraction shooters, with a bit of hero shooter DNA awkwardly spliced in, trying to blend a genre aimed at hardcore audiences into something more casual-friendly and sanitized. But that was the main issue, because extraction shooters by design cater to players who want high stakes, sweaty, tense gameplay, but Marathon was offering none of that. Proximity chat, a feature Bungie popularized, was absent in the name of safe environments, effectively representing what is wrong with Marathon's design approach: safe, bland, and soulless. Add in the polarizing stylized visuals and Bungie had created a game that seemed to please no one, while trying to please everyone. A textbook example of a committee-built AAA title, and a game designed to capture players on brands and trends alone. Now, you would think Bungie was facing an uphill battle, but another mountain was about to come crashing down on top of it. Bungie has a history of lawsuits and plagiarism allegations, a very long list. From the accidental use of fan art in Destiny 2, not once, not twice, but 3 times, to a much bigger case, a plagiarism lawsuit over Destiny 2's Red War campaign, allegedly lifted from a WordPress sci-fi serial. In a bizarre twist, because Bungie had vaulted the campaign, they couldn't provide proper evidence and had to rely on YouTube clips in court, which of course were thrown out. The case remains ongoing. And then there were the internal lawsuits. This is where things get actually insane. A $200 million lawsuit by Chris Barrett, Marathon's original game director and a former Bungie board member, at Bungie for 25 years, mysteriously replaced in 2024. According to reporting and court documents, Barrett was terminated following internal allegations of inappropriate behavior involving at least 8 female employees, specifically through some very creepy DMs. But Barrett argues that he was wrongfully terminated, and that Bungie, Sony, is also revoking his founder shares upon termination, the same type of equity shares Marty O'Donnell had once fought for in court, reportedly valued at $45 million. Barrett in turn claims he was made a scapegoat, not just for Bungie's underperformance, but for much deeper misconduct inside the company. In court filings, he alleged that a still active company founder routinely made remarks such as, quote, "A woman's place is barefoot and pregnant." The lawsuit also accuses a very senior executive of attending meetings while intoxicated and engaging in sexual conduct at Bungie-sponsored events. And perhaps the most disturbing allegation, that one employee had repeatedly exposed himself in the office, pressing against a glass window overlooking the entire studio floor.
Alright, that's it! Now it's my turn! 5 minutes alone, that's all I need!
Barrett not only exposed himself to the world, but all of Bungie. The case remains ongoing. But for Bungie, already dealing with backlash, layoffs, and collapsing morale, this lawsuit cracked open a far uglier picture of its internal culture, one that might be even more chaotic than anyone imagined. and somehow things were only about to get worse, at least more publicly. May 15, 2025, an artist known as Anti-Real came forward claiming that many assets shown in the marathon reveal had been directly lifted from her 2017 designs. And it wasn't subtle. In fact, it was so bad that some images still showed the Anti-Real tag clearly visible inside of the game. And the kicker, Marathon's own art director actively followed Anti-Real on social media. A day later, Bungie issued a statement. They admitted to the mistake yet again, but tried to downplay it, avoiding official accounts, instead communicating through the dev account with only 11,000 followers, promising to conduct a review, and then came the live stream.
It came to our attention that an artist who worked on Marathon in the early stages of pre-production took a number of graphic elements from a graphic designer without permission or acknowledgement, and placed them on a decal sheet that was then checked in 2020. The decal sheet included icons and text elements. These elements ended up in our alpha build, and there's absolutely no excuse for this oversight.
The stream chat took to calling Marathon art raiders, spamming plagiarism will make me God, quoting Durandal's the villain from the original Marathon, the face of a company in ruins. But despite all the backlash, Sony remains adamant. Marathon will launch before April 2026, even after officially announcing an indefinite delay, a delay that developers were even unaware of. In their words, they are doubling down on the original Marathon universe, promising tougher difficulty and the return of proximity chat. Improvements directly from feedback, but as Destiny showed us time and time again, will they be enough to save it? While on the Sony side, they are still doubling down on its live service strategy, vowing not to repeat the Concord mistake, a promise that feels almost guaranteed to age like milk, left out in the sun. Inside Bungie itself, morale had been crumbling since 2023 layoffs. Remember, Marathon's development was through all of that, and now with a pending disaster, morale was in freefall. Bungie spent the last decade taking all the classic corporate out-of-touch textbook greedy boxes, and now they were trend-chasing, pouring millions into perhaps the worst possible genre they could have chosen, extraction shooters, a genre they would never be able to recoup the alleged $300 million budget Marathon has cost to produce.
You can only really be innovative when you do stuff that's crazy and you take risks and you do things wrong. I really believe that if you're doing something you feel comfortable doing, if you're doing something that's safe, that you are sure is going to work out perfectly, you're not really going to do anything very interesting.
But here's the thing to conclude this story. Making games is an incredibly difficult task, and Bungie always had a leadership problem, especially after Alex Seropian's departure. Just have to look at Halo 2, buried in mismanagement, and from there, nearly every single title they have produced was built through development hell and crunch. For years, it was easy for fans to point fingers, first Microsoft, then Activision. But when Bungie went independent and then sold off to Sony, the excuses ran out. Fans were disillusioned, and this time, they blamed Bungie itself. No matter the publisher, the issues were the same. Because those issues weren't just external, but also internal. Pete Parsons, the corporate plant you could say, still Bungie's CEO, still making the calls, still not stepping aside. A simple, clear, identifiable issue. The man you can attribute the studio's recent direction, especially post Destiny 2 and all of its monetization tactics, and the incubation projects, and of course, the layoffs. But the issue never was just Pete Parsons, and the reality seems far more complicated than just one bad guy or just one bad studio or a bad publisher. Over the years, Bungie's board and other creative leads underwent many shakeups, especially during the Sony acquisition. But there's two names that always stayed the same: Pete Parsons and the elusive Jason Jones. Quiet, reserved, always in the background. Once a powerful voice at Bungie, and one key figure behind the studio's ambitious and catastrophic incubation projects, like Marathon, According to Paul Tassi at Forbes, developers warned the leadership for years about the lack of PvE in Marathon, the exact same kind of communication problem that crippled Destiny and even Halo. Marathon 2 went through its own development hell, and just like Destiny, concerns were ignored. Tassi also reports that Marathon was originally pitched to the leadership in 2020, well before the Sony acquisition as a PvP-only extraction shooter inspired by Tarkov, pitched by, as he put it, a good old boy in Bungie's leadership, and who so happens to be Chief Creative Officer in 2020 and front-running incubation projects, Jason Jones. The same Jason Jones who has long been known to clash creatively since the creation of Destiny. The same Jason Jones who in 2021 became Chief Vision Officer, tasked with, quote, help Bungie's top creative leadership unlock their full potential at the company. Now, was it Jones who pitched Marathon? We don't know. Maybe. It could have been someone else, like Chris Barrett, the original director of Marathon, another longtime Bungie lead, another good old boy, the one that perhaps didn't listen to those concerns. And after his exit, Joe Ziegler, the former Valorant director, stepped in, under the supervision of Jason Jones. But regardless of who did what, here's the facts that matter. Those leaders with massive bloated egos, the board, for more than a decade, exploited their developers, exploited their players, and exploited Bungie's name until it meant almost nothing, completely blind to their own flaws. From the communication breakdowns to the lack of clear creative direction, even the repeated art plagiarisms and all the misconducts and the internal culture, all of it stems from one place: leadership. Their decisions, their lack of oversight, their arrogance. Leadership matters. They play a very critical role. They steer the ship, settle disputes, and point developers in a unified direction. And the devs under them, the most talented that we attribute to the creation of Destiny and Halo, many of them left because no matter how talented you are, you can't outrun bad management forever, especially as projects and the studio grew larger and more complex. And that was Bungie's final blow. The bigger they got, the worse it became. Today, the Bungie that exists, it's not Bungie anymore, it's the classic Ship of Theseus paradox, replacing of pieces and eventually what remains is something else entirely. A tragic ending for a studio that once overflowed with ideas, talent, and heart, and now Marathon is the final straw, the last kick before death, a project so mismanaged, so out of touch, it's the perfect culmination of what Bungie has become: an empty logo. But I want to leave you with this. No matter who you blame, Pete Parsons, the leadership, Jason Jones, Bungie did what few studios ever managed to do. They created memories, they built worlds, they shaped entire generations of gamers, and changed the gaming industry for better or worse. And no matter the missteps, the mismanagement, or the downfall, those memories, those experiences, they can't be erased. So for that, we say thank you, and thank you for watching.
Two guys in front of me were talking, you know, at first about college. Like they were older, but they'd obviously like gone to college together, and I think they worked together. And at some point they started talking about Halo, and I think it was Halo 2 for them. And they weren't really talking about how much Halo meant to them. They were talking about, and they weren't really talking about how much they meant to each other, but that's what they were doing, is they were sharing those stories of, you know, where they were and what they were doing and how they were feeling. And, you know, that moment, you know, that's like still keeping me going. I mean, that might fuel me for the rest of my life. And it's not the only time that's happened, but you get a few of those, and, you know, that's all I want. It's just people sharing memories in an experience that, you know, wouldn't have existed without, you know, you bleeding buckets of blood into the, you know, whatever code or design or something like that. That's what, yeah, two people having an experience that they wouldn't have had, you know, if you hadn't created, what you created. Like that's, I don't know, that's what matters. That's what matters to me.